In case you happen to miss part 1 of this countdown, I've left a link in the description of the video for your convenience so that you can go see the first half of my list before continuing forward. If you have already seen the first video and are here to see it continue, then welcome back. I'm glad you decided to stick around. Before I continue on with the third worst entry, I'd like to take this opportunity to give some brief announcements regarding a few things. First and foremost, this is just a reminder that I have done review videos on every single episode of Season 1 of the Powerpuff Girls reboot, and I encourage you to check them out if you haven't already, especially if you're new to my channel. As mentioned at the beginning of the previous video, shoutouts to Bug-Eyed Freaks for her continued support over the past year and a half. I sincerely cannot thank her enough for all she's done for me. There is a link to her Tumblr blog in the description of this video, just like the last one, and I encourage you all to check it out as well. I also want to give another shout out to Dolly Spiral for this awesome piece of fan art that they drew for me not too long ago. I really love the added details and shadowing effects here, pun intended. Special thanks to Unlucky Faye as well, another artist who graciously drew this hilarious picture of my himself looming over me shortly after I released my Electric Buttercup review. On top of that, shoutouts to DYW14 for animating this absolutely incredible gif of my Powerpuff character dabbing. This was something I never expected to see, but she went the extra mile and I cannot thank her enough for creating such a masterpiece. And, as always, shoutouts to Paragon Aura for continuing to draw these avatars for me. I wouldn't be able to make these videos without her help. Links to all of the artist accounts are in the description below. If any of you watching have made fan art for me and are interested in sharing it, feel free to tag me on Twitter or submit it to me on Tumblr, as those sites are where I'm most likely to see it. I'm always more than happy to share what you've made.
Now things are getting fun. It's party time!
Yes. It shouldn't be any surprise that I've included the most notorious reboot episode of them all as one of the biggest nosedives of the season. There's a lot of wrong going on here. I mean, a lot of wrong. Yeah, I could sit here and comment on the twerking for the millionth time because that's the most overused detriment the show has ever had to date. But then I'd be beating a dead horse, and where's the fun in that? No, Painbow isn't just taking the number 3 spot purely for its attempts at trying to be hip with the kids and sexually provocative dance maneuvers performed by children. No, that isn't enough to earn that title. Painbow earns its number 3 spot for being an all-around incomprehensible mess, ranging from a blatantly obvious plot hole that is impossible to miss, to an LSD-induced panda antagonist that makes me never want to go to a party again. Top that off with a lesson that lacks any relevance to the events that inspire it, and we've got ourselves a total disaster. The episode features Buttercup pulling practical jokes in order to interrupt Miss Keen's class until a rainbow appears out of nowhere and brainwashes every single citizen in Townsville except the girls. Why the girls aren't affected despite looking right at it? I don't know. Blossom and Bubbles get put under the spell later on in the episode, so clearly they're not immune to Allegra's magic. If something like this is going to have an effect on every single character except for the main ones in the story, there needs to be a better explanation for it besides they're the main characters. Plot armor isn't a justifiable reason as to why this is acceptable. Later on, the girls figure out that this rainbow has been causing everyone to act out of character. While I would like to criticize the behavior of Townsville citizens, these two stop signs are facing the completely wrong direction, so I can't really blame these people for wrecking their vehicles. And once the trio fly up into the clouds, they discover this perplexing pop-cultured panda raving to EDM and sending good vibes everyone's way. Despite his measures to make sure that nobody bums out his chill vibe, as the show puts it, the girls attempt to stop him and return their city to normal. Well, 2 of them at least.
Wanna hug? Olive G? Yes! I can't.
Can't what?
Even?
Can't even what?
Oh, like she literally can't even.
Whatever. It's just a cruddy bear.
Oh yeah, thanks Bubbles. You're really making a contribution there. Appreciate it. Trying to describe Allegra as a villain is like trying to explain why we as human beings need sleep. Yes, it's common knowledge that sleep provides a useful function by allowing our brains to take a break and reorganize themselves, but to this day, at the very moment I'm recording this video anyways, we are still incapable of explaining exactly why we rest. Similarly, it is apparent that Allegro obviously serves a function in the sense that he's present to be the antagonist of the story, but what is he trying to accomplish? What motivates him? there is no information, no intent given as to what his end goal is in all of this. And to add to that, there is no explanation for who he is, what he is, or why he has the powers that he does. It is revealed after Buttercup taps him on the arms a few times that Allegro is actually just this tiny blue bear thing, but what does that mean? Why does he put on this outer panda shell? Does it give him his powers? Does it contain his powers? Does it limit his powers? So many questions are left hanging here that could easily be answered in a span of 30 seconds or less. Let's look at the introduction for every main villain from the original 1998 series for a brief moment here. Mojo Jojo is an evil super genius trying to take over the world. Him is the literal devil who wants to make the girls suffer. Princess is a greedy rich kid who wants to be a Powerpuff Girl but can't. The Amoeba Boys want to commit a crime despite being the most incompetent bunch around. Fuzzy Lumpkins is a hillbilly that just wants to be left alone and gets angry when people touch his property. The Gangrene Gang is a group of teenagers who get their kicks by messing with people. The Rowdy Rough Boys were made for the sole purpose of defeating the Powerpuff Girls. And Sedusa uses her looks to steal priceless jewelry and get rich quick. Every single one of these antagonists are given an identity that informs the viewer of who they are, and even if some like Sedusa doesn't have an explanation for where they got their powers, we're at least given some motivation for why they do the things that they do in the very first episodes that they appear in. Allegro gives us nothing. As distracting as it might be, a 30-second exposition dump would be extremely helpful in alleviating this issue. I'm not expecting an encyclopedia's worth of information shoved in my face all at once, but it's important to establish a character so that your audience can understand them. On top of that, Allegro doesn't give us anything to understand. He's just a panda, except not a panda, that loves drugs and partying. Again, we don't know what he's trying to accomplish, who he is, or why he has the powers that he does. And while we don't necessarily need an explanation for why he has his powers, at least explain what the deal is with his tiny, squishy blue bear form compared to this panda shell. I really don't know what's going on here. And on top of that, Buttercup learns a lesson that's essentially ham-fisted in there just for the sake of teaching kids something, despite there being no instigation for Buttercup to come to a conclusion at all. As you've probably noticed, I've been glancing over the minor instances here and there that reference Bubbles' tween girl personality with the can't even joke and such, but at this point just talking about it any further than bringing it up would simply be redundant. As much as I want to sit here and unironically say, "Hey Lamau my dudes, that's totally savage, let's get lit AF fam," I'm not going to do that because it's going to make my dialogue more distracting, and given a few years' time when people may be watching this in the future, that phrase will already be old enough to make this entire video dated. Since it's already too late for me to take that back, I'd just like to say that the current 2018 version of myself apologizes greatly and hopes that future me can forgive current me for my past mistakes. We both already know how much we detest the first go I had at reviewing this episode back in 2016, and my early 2018 self hopes that this segment I just did makes up for it. I also discuss more of Painbow's issues in my review of the sequel episode, Somewhere Over the Swingset, so if you're curious to hear more about what that's like, go ahead and check that out along with the collab I did with Jay. I highly recommend them. I think I've dwelled on Painbow long enough at this point, so I digress. On to number 2. It is fair for most to assume that the new villains introduced during the Powerpuff Girls reboot first season aren't nearly as fleshed out as some of the more popular ones from the original series. Based on what I've covered with characters such as Allegro and Silico, it would seem that this new roster of antagonists is pretty lackluster. First, there's Allegro, whom I've already said was an unspecified acid-trippin' panda who just wants to throw a party all the time. Silico is, again, a potentially threatening villain that fits the new generation who ends up being wasted potential. There's Manboy, who exists to essentially mock the old-fashioned male stereotype, and then there's Packrat, who is honestly so forgettable that I debated whether or not he was even worth mentioning. But there is one villain who has stuck out to me in both of the episodes that they appear in, because the two of these episodes show them as an elaborate schemer who knows how to adapt to any situation and manipulate the will of the unsuspecting people to get what they want.
Silk, style, and everything vile. These were the ingredients that once made the terrible twosome the Fashionistas.
Of course, I'm talking about Bianca Bikini, a fashion-crazed doer of dastardly deeds who works together with her sister, Barbarous, and hopefully rid the world of the Powerpuff Girls once and for all. There's been some discussion regarding the redundancy of Bianca as a villain given the fact that already established characters such as Sedusa and the lesser-known Mask Scara exist. Although given Bianca's more modern appeal, for lack of a better word, I'd rather she be a separate entity than an updated version of a previous villain. As for the episode in question, Bianca and Barbarous exhibit their best appearance in Fashion Forward, an episode in which the two of them pretend to turn over a new leaf and start their own company selling the next big trendy item, scarves. Okay, they're not actually scarves, but they're basically scarves. The pair has decided that they've given up their villainous ways for good, and instead want to make a contribution to society by providing a good that people will want to buy, so they can earn their money through the magical world of capitalism. They present their reformation by making an appearance on an in-universe show known as the Turnaround Tank, an intentional parody of the popular show Shark Tank for those who are unfamiliar with it. This broadcast is actually a clever delivery of exposition, as it not only introduces who the fashionistas are as characters and hints at some of their motives, but it also establishes their role in the remainder of the episode. The television show manages to combine a brief backstory with an opening setup in a quick dose of exposition that doesn't overstay its welcome. As the commercial goes on, the focus shifts over to the girls and their piqued interest in these newfangled neckwarmers that are sure to become all the rage in Townsville, just as most trends tend to come and go. The professor, on the other hand, doesn't want his kids to have anything to do with them, as he is profoundly against the message that these neckwarmers condone. The whole concept of looks are everything that the fashionistas use as a slogan is a very negative message to associate with, because not only does it segregate people based on how they look rather than who they are as respectable people, but it puts down those who don't fit this idealized look. Considering this is a problem that many people struggle with in the real world, I found the professor's persistence to be quite admirable here. This is undoubtedly his best appearance in the entire first season, because he uses tough love to teach the girls valuable lessons about supporting company messages and not getting swept up in the latest trend or craze that everybody else may be obsessing over. I guess I just mostly relate to the professor because I never understood fads like this to begin with. With the sole exception of Pokemon Go, I can't think of a single fad that I willingly got myself involved with because I don't see the appeal in them that others do, and that's fine. If you enjoy collecting things or performing the latest trendy dance moves, then more power to you. I think this episode also shows just how impressionable these corporate trends can be on people, especially kids. The primary demographic that these neckwarmers are shown to appeal to are kids, which is a clever marketing choice given that they're more invested in fitting in with the popular crowd than most adults are. It's not like all of these students are fully aware of the message Bianca and Barbarous are preaching here. Some just see the neckwarmers and instantly want one because they look cool. It's as simple as that. When the girls go to school the next day without any of their own, they get mocked by the other students because they aren't cool with them. It's a portrayal of peer pressure and discrimination in which the kids who have these strips of fabric believe they are superior to those who do not. Blossom becomes especially upset about this when she's kicked out of student council, and she has every right to be, considering that her lack of a scarf is not grounds for such an act to be made. Yeah, these kids are still assholes for treating her this way, but unlike the Wrinklegruff gals where there was no justification for it, it's a situation where they are swept up in the craze and forced to comply with society's image, otherwise they themselves will also look bad. And these kids can't have that because they're in an environment where that sort of thing matters to them. This episode fascinates me because there is some deeper commentary to be found here that I'm just scratching the surface on, as this episode has a lot of different subsidiary messages that, while some may be unintentional, back the greater narrative, and I find that to be very interesting. The girls listen to the professor at first, but when they have a run-in with the fashionistas the next day, the terrible twosome end up giving them a free set, essentially earning them free advertising as the girls go around showing off their neckwarmers at school and on social media. The fashionistas are such clever businesswomen because they know exactly how to get themselves on the map. They've got a marketing campaign that's taking the nation by storm, and now they've even got the Powerpuff Girls promoting their products. Well, more like Bianca is the clever one because, in all honesty, Barbarous doesn't seem to play that much of a role in the act. I suppose the fact that she doesn't speak English puts her at a disadvantage because it hinders her ability to communicate, but most of the time in this episode is spent with her just standing next to Bianca instead of actually doing something. I would have liked to see her enact more of the brawn half of the duo that they seem to be going for, since Bianca uses her intellect to outsmart everybody with their fashion trend scam for the duration of the episode, but Barbarous, not so much. at least until the end, in which the fashionistas activate the mind control devices that give them the power over the entire town as dictators, with a plan similar to that of the SpongeBob movie, in which Plankton took control of Bikini Bottom by giving his customers complimentary bucket hats instead of neck warmers with every purchase. Fortunately for the girls, the professor finds out their little neck warmer spree and demands he give them to him, although Blossom's avarice gets the better of her when she puts hers back on and becomes brainwashed into serving Bianca's every whim. Her father shines when he comes back to save the day, as he single-handedly, despite Buttercup and Bubbles' willingness to help, takes down the fashionistas and saves the town from their imminent slavery. My only minor nitpick with his rebellion is that I would have preferred for him to have purposely thrown the scepter he had stolen instead of clumsily tripping, because it would have made him look more heroic, but aside from that, I greatly enjoy this episode for what it has to say. Overall, Fashion Forward serves as a fantastic way to emphasize the responsible, fatherly role that the professor is supposed to play in the girls' lives, while simultaneously presenting the fashionistas with an evil plan that suits them rather well. There are so many ways to interpret this episode's lessons, making it a more dynamic experience that opens up all sorts of possibilities for discussions. I really wish the reboot had more episodes like this. When I first came up with the idea of making a top 5 list of the best and worst episodes of the Powerpuff Girls reboot, I could already tell that the top 2 worst episodes were going to be shoo-ins. Common sense dictates that there is a larger percentage of entries to choose from when selecting the inadequate side of episodes compared to the adequate, and it should be known that I did experience some difficulty choosing Horn Sweet Horn, the Wrinkle Gruff Gals, and Painbow over some of the other entries in the season. Snow Month, however, was a guaranteed choice to take that second place spot from the very start.
It's spring, spring is in the air. Birds are chirping, bees they buzz, a fresh breeze through my hair. Accountants doing taxes, and flowers everywhere.
What could have been a harmless little episode about the girls playing in the snow quickly devolves into a whirlwind of disarray, as a web of disjointed B-plots overtakes all semblance of a streamlined narrative. The opening scene presents us with the girls celebrating all of the pure and natural qualities of the season, ranging from the warm spring breeze blowing through the air to the chirp of the birds and the buzzing of the bees. Buttercup complains because she's upset that another winter has come and gone right by without a single day of snowfall, but luckily for her, she's not disappointed for too long, for when the girls wake up the following morning, the entire city is suddenly covered in a winter wonderland, despite the opening scene leading us to believe the episode was headed down an entirely different direction. My biggest qualm with this discrepancy doesn't lie within the fact that it's snowing in springtime exactly, but rather the thematic imagery. Yes, it's not out of the ordinary for it to snow during the springtime in more northern climates, but the presentation of the opening scene indicates an ending of wintertime, that the period has passed and nature is moving forwards. Ask any random person on the street to name the first thing that comes to mind when they hear the word winter. It is practically guaranteed that over 50% of the responses will result in a word related to snow, because that is the most general association with the season of winter. Obviously, this will vary depending on said person's geographic location, as living in different biomes will result in different climates and likely different answers. For example, a person living in Tampa Bay, Florida isn't going to experience the same snowy winters that somebody living in Boston, Massachusetts would, because they're several hundred miles closer to the equator. Symbolism and imagery of the season of spring indicate a change in weather, a rebirth and rejuvenation of nature that marks the end of a cold, dead winter and the coming of a warm, alive spring and summer. The episode establishes said themes and motifs only to do away with them the following day with no logical explanation for doing so. This episode could have played with this idea of the girls not wanting winter to end instead, because the end of winter would mark the end of snow days, and as such, spring would inevitably arrive because nature continues flowing forward in a never-ending cycle. This would motivate the girls to want to create a legitimate snow month in order to keep winter from leaving. One where it never stops snowing so that they can never go to school. Of course, that's just one alternative. As mentioned earlier, Snow Month has a profusion of subplots that all clash together, which really doesn't suit an episode of a cartoon that is only 11 minutes in length. The main overarching, for lack of a better word, storyline here revolves around Blossom being told that this boy by the name of Jared Shapiro likes her. My issues with this character run far deeper into the rabbit hole, but to keep things simple, I'm going to run through them as quickly as I can. Jared Shapiro is generic. He's a very static, uninteresting character that doesn't have any likable personality traits because that's exactly what he lacks. A personality. If this character maybe had some more to him than just some random boy that could be replaced with any other background character in this show, then maybe I could bring myself to care even the slightest little bit. Maybe. It would have helped to learn more about him. What makes him so appealing to Blossom, for instance? But there's nothing to know because he's so dull and uninspired. Honestly, I've never liked the idea of relationships interfering with the Powerpuff Girls aside from brief nods to it here and there because that isn't something that's suited to this type of show. If Jared had more thought put into him, more traits that actually define him as an individual rather than a placeholder, he wouldn't be so bad. But the fact that he exists just so Blossom can go gaga over him gives me no legitimate reason to be forgiving. It also doesn't help that after this moment, he's shoved to the back of the line for the remaining duration of the episode until the very end, but that will be acknowledged in time. And to address the elephant in the room, the self-insert-like qualities, while looking bad, I believe to be an honest mistake and I defend the writer as such. Anyone who is still going around calling this person vile things without any actual justification needs to learn a lesson in the field of respect. Yes, I think the show is still at fault for making this mistake in the first place because even though it wasn't intentional, it still upset a lot of people, and considering the subject matter, people had a right to be bothered by it. I apologize if my original Jared Shapiro video came off the wrong way, but I never attacked anyone. I simply provided the evidence given and then proceeded to state that it was likely not done on purpose. I admit that I could have done a better job of defending the issue rather than simply stating the evidence, but I have not, nor will I ever, stoop to the level of petty insults. Innocent until proven guilty, I say. Speaking of innocent, this leads me to the only redeeming part of the episode, in which the girls go sledding after their initial excitement at the sight of snow falling from the clouds. It's a very fun and dynamic scene. Just seeing the Powerpuff Girls do something fun for once instead of spending time in boring old school. For a comedy-based show, this is a fun attempt at introducing some faster action into the mix, and stuck out as a memorable moment as a result. After their fun, Blossom ends up stumbling across Jared once again, and so she flies up into the clouds and freezes them over for the next month so that she doesn't have to go to school and respond to his note. This begs a few questions, however. When Blossom froze the clouds, did she do this once and only once? Or did she fly up into the sky every single day and keep the clouds from leaving the city? If it's the former, then there's no explanation for how the snow magically melts at the end of the episode, but if she's doing it every day, then that's highly unlikely she was able to fly into the sky every single morning for a whole 30 days straight without anyone seeing her even just once. It's hard to believe that the entire city of Townsville would be complacent with this never-ending snowstorm for an entire month straight without a single person complaining about it. This seems like it would become an issue that the mayor would eventually have to call the girls to solve, seeing as it would be an impediment that was keeping the entire civilization from functioning properly. It's explained that Bubbles and Buttercup were just shrugging the issue off as climate change, but climate change of the 2010s has dominantly been observed to be in favor of an increase in the Earth's average temperatures rather than a decrease, and one random snowstorm that never ends isn't automatically climate change anyways. Besides, the girls are more than capable of removing the snow on their own. They've got I-beams, tornado spins, Green Lantern powers, you name it. There are plenty of creative ways that the girls can come up with to get rid of the snow. All they have to do is do it. Unfortunately for them, they didn't act soon enough because a local news report chimes in on the TV stating that a group of Yetis has infested Townsville and taken over the same sledding hill the girls were seen going down earlier in the episode. So not only do we have Blossom's current situation regarding Jared as well as the never-ending period of snowfall, but now there's also a Yeti problem on top of that. The way this whole Yeti situation is handled is a mystery in and of itself, as it revolves around Buttercup and the Yetis being nasty to each other when there's really no need for that at all. On one hand, the Yetis have trespassed into the city and taken over public property claiming it as their own, which becomes a legal issue that the mayor could easily call the girls to come and stop. Spoiler alert, he doesn't do that. This is also grounds for the girls to set these snobby Yetis straight and send them packing, but again, they don't do that. Buttercup also stereotypes all of the Yetis by accusing all of them of being bad purely because of one negative experience with one bouncer and overhearing a conversation in which they mocked the lower class.
Poor people.
That's real tasteful there. Instead, Buttercup just chooses to float there and complain to her sisters about how awful they've treated them without actively doing anything about it. You know, besides the obvious solution for the girls to just beat up the Yetis, they could also just find a way to melt the snow. If there isn't any snow on the ground, the Yetis would have to leave because there wouldn't be anywhere for them to have their ski resort. The solution here is pretty obvious. But then again, what do I know? I don't write for cartoons, I just watch them and make videos about them on the internet. It's not like it takes a food critic to tell you whether or not food tastes good, right? I digress. The ultimate revelation that Buttercup has in figuring out Blossom is the culprit has to be the most inept part of the episode. After the three girls are seen leaving the sledding hill, Bubbles laments to her sisters that she misses springtime and its intoxicating delights, stating,
I wish we could get rid of the snow. Then maybe they'd leave and we can bring spring back.
A few moments later.
I wish I could bring spring back too. Oh, that was supposed to be a personal moment.
Blossom, it was you the whole time?
You know, Buttercup, you can't just assume that the fat kid is responsible when there's no more food at the party. That's awfully gratuitous of you. Just because Blossom has the capability of producing ice breath doesn't mean she's automatically responsible for causing the month-long snow period. She is just as upset about the sledding situation as you and Bubbles are, and she has given no indication that she's guilty of doing anything other than the brief scene earlier that morning, which you decided to brush off as nothing instead of looking deeper into it. And yes, she does end up freezing a flower after giving a hefty sigh, but for all you know, that could have been out of sorrow, not guilt. The way I see it, there are several better ways to have handled this scene besides what is given. The first option would be to have Blossom say something along the lines of, I wish I hadn't frozen those clouds a few weeks ago. Or every morning, or whatever time frame it is, because that would be more indicative of her actively doing something and being at fault. A second option, assuming Blossom would stick with the original line delivery, would be for Buttercup to slowly put the details together and question her instead of jumping straight to the point, giving Blossom a chance to lie and then stumble over her words. Buttercup did the same thing to her in the episode A Very Special Blossom, in which she slowly but surely caught on to the inconsistencies in Blossom's lies, which allowed her to piece together the truth. Thirdly, Bubbles and Buttercup could have gone up and comfort her, insisting that it's not her fault and that they'll figure something out, leading into three more possible branching paths from there. Blossom could A. admit the truth to her sisters, B. attempt to admit the truth to her sisters only to get cut off by Zach when he shows up, or C, not respond at all, and then have Zach show up anyways. There are several alternatives to the delivery presented in Snow Month that would have made much better sense in context to the situation. As I just said, a Yeti named Zach shows up and terrorizes the town, causing the girls to not spring into action and try to stop him, but rather argue with each other over Blossom's mistake that shouldn't really be taking precedence when there's a giant Yeti acting as a potential threat to innocent civilians. And it's also worth noting that the other Yetis hate Zach because he ruined their last ski resort, which implies that not all Yetis are the same and Buttercup is being discriminatory towards them based off the three she's encountered up to this point when there's really no need for it whatsoever. Ugh. Guys. This episode is such a mess. Okay, I'm good. Let's keep going. I'm almost done. The episode comes to a close with the snow magically melting with no explanation, the Yetis leaving just as I said they would because the snow is no longer present, neither Buttercup nor the Yetis getting their comeuppance for their treatment of each other as in equals, Blossom meeting up with Jared again to reject him, in which he responds that he only wanted to be friends, which is such a cop-out response by the way, because a boy doesn't just go up to a girl with flowers and shares his feelings without actually expecting something in return, and I am so done with this episode now. The only redeeming factor is the sledding sequence, as I mentioned before, but other than that, this episode is a total mess, and I hope I never have to watch it again. Phew. There. It's done. Before I get to my top picks for the absolute best and definite worst episodes of the Powerpuff Girls Reboot Season 1, allow me to go over some brief honorable mentions which just barely didn't make the cut.
Be careful, he might be dangerous. His name is Frederick, and he's not dangerous.
Just grab it already! Ugh, I lost my concentration. Now I have to start all over again. Ugh, come on! JK, totally got it.
Pretty cool, huh?
Not really. Are you kidding me? That was amazing! Bubbles, stop supporting the bad guys! We're gonna make it!
Hello, Buttercup. Thanks for inviting me.
Oh, enough! Introducing Dracula now?
It's a twist!
It's a hack move, and not scary!
Wait! I happen to know a thing or two about scary.
You, the girl dressed like a peacock lady.
Whatever.
And you've come here for our help because you are tiny, helpless babies.
No! We're superheroes!
That's right, you are.
You can be anything you want when you grow up.
You guys aren't very good at your jobs, are you?
That sounds like a challenge.
How did that sound like a challenge?
And, likewise, here are some dishonorable mentions that were also just shy of cracking my top 5 worst list.
Here comes the airplane.
Dude, Bubbles, will you stop? He can't eat peas any better than he can catch a kickball.
He's still sensitive about that.
No, he's not still sensitive because he's not real.
I asked Supna to join us for family movie night. She's the woman I've been telling you about.
Woo, thanks for making room, guys. Personal boundaries being violated. At least this cheesy popcorn is delicious. Do you guys have any snacks to spare?
Of course. Want some popcorn?
Hey, my popcorn! Bubbles, what are you doing? There is no more Bubbles. I have shed that name. From henceforth, there is only Dark Bubbles.
Oh, Dark Bubbles. Wow, you really changed it up there.
Professor, what you did was reckless. You could have gotten hurt.
Blossom.
I gotta agree with Ribbonhead. First, you sprain your wrist a little, and the next thing you know, BAM! Shark attack!
But Professor, we do dangerous stuff all the time.
Yes, for the safety of Townsville. Never just to show off.
We're not showing off.
Yeah, we're just shoving it in everyone's face that we can do something they can't.
Very rarely do I get an urge to go back and watch an episode of the reboot long after I've reviewed it. Typically, once a review of a specific episode is out, I never feel the need to go back and watch it again because I've fulfilled my task and want to move forward. There have been a few exceptions to this, for better or for worse, and my number 1 pick fits that bill.
Still warm.
It's here, but where?
The Big Sleep is a horror parody episode that pays homage to the popular films of the genre through its use of tropes and overall presentation. The story begins not with the Powerpuff Girls, but with Space Tow Truck of all things. Although given how much the girls have watched this show over the course of the first season, I can't really say I'm surprised by this. I am assuming that they are binge watching the newest season on the Reboot's in-universe version of Hulu or Netflix, which I'd like to commend for not being as obtrusive as most other 2010s cultural nods that have been in previously discussed episodes. Selections of clips from the Space Tow Truck series are interspliced during this opening act, in which villains such as Meter Man and Signal Cleese are seen attempting to destroy the admirable automobile and take over the galaxy. Honestly, the whole concept for Space Tow Truck is ridiculous enough that I could actually see something like this airing alongside other ridiculous sci-fi films like Sharknado, Mega Shark vs. Giant Octopus, Ghost Shark, Jersey Shore Shark Attack, Two-Headed Shark Attack, Dino Shark, Shark Tank, Sand Sharks, Hammerhead Shark Frenzy, Sharktopus. Jesus, how many shark movies is sci-fi gonna make? I especially like these two shots with Signal Cleese looming over the space-traveling pickup truck because it emphasizes his sheer force and power over the tiny little tow truck as his hand envelops it. And besides, it looks cool. The girls are indulging themselves in space tow truck lore when who should show up but Professor Utonium, telling them that it's past their bedtime and it's time that they get some sleep. Just as he was in Fashion Forward, I applaud Professor Utonium's role as a phenomenal dad in this episode. He is looking out for his daughter's well-being and, as we'll see as the episode unfolds, his creativity in doing so. He allows the girls to stay up for a little bit longer so that they can continue watching their show, although it doesn't last for too long because the power goes out soon after. They are caught off guard by the professor rushing into the room, beating up a pillow, and then running with them into the lab where they hide before the monstrous vermin can get to them. This being the first instance of horror tropes making an appearance, as the use of a point of view shot mimics the zombie pillow's pursuit towards the professor as he lunges forward down the hall. The professor then proceeds to explain how this thing got loose in their house, as it turns out that he created it with the intention to be the world's comfiest pillow. A pillow so comfy, it can put anyone to sleep as soon as they rest their head upon it. He even gave it artificial intelligence that would allow it to adapt to an individual's needs and fluff itself accordingly. You know, because nothing ever goes wrong when you create artificial intelligence. The entire concept of the zombie pillow roaming around the house, hunting them down one by one and putting them to sleep could actually apply to a few different kinds of horror films. In one sense, it parodies zombie films in the way that the pillow hunts down its victims that are alive and awake and infects them with drowsiness, which instantly puts them to sleep. On the other hand, it could also be seen as a parody on a slasher film, in which the sleep represents a murder and the pillow hunts down its victims one by one, similar to the style of serial killers or scary monsters.
Buttercup? Buttercup?
Compliments to the score on this episode. The background music and sound effects mimic a lot of horror soundtracks in its use of string instruments and rising tone that serve to build suspense at various points throughout the episode. Obviously, this is a family-friendly cartoon, so there aren't many expectations for anything truly horrifying to happen, but it's the thought that counts here. It works with its limitations. After he finishes catching the girls up on the situation, the four of them proceed to go hunt the pillow down and try to catch it before it can get to them first. I adore moments like this, even in the reboot. Family is a consistent theme that spans throughout the entire 6 seasons of the real Powerpuff Girls series, and even if the reboot is inferior, I still enjoy seeing moments like this because family is an important theme to me too. Just seeing the girls and their dad bonding over hunting down this vicious sack of fluff makes me wish moments like this appeared more often in the overall show, but alas, I'm gonna have to take what I can get. The professor gets struck down by the pillow after it enacts a sneak attack in the girls' kitchen, leaving them one man down as they continue to sneak around searching for the sentient cushion's whereabouts.
There it goes! Aw, man, that pillow is casing us! Pillow casing us? Am I right, Bubs?
More and more horror movie homages begin to pop up, ranging from a mock jump scare with an opening closet to a poltergeist reference with the television spontaneously turning on, to subtle one-liners that give nods to movies like Aliens, The Sixth Sense, and Jurassic Park.
And another perfect plan, Blossom. Clever pillow.
In all good horror movie fashion, the girls end up getting picked off one by one and forced into a lethargic slumber as they fail to capture the pillow in time. In the end, it is revealed that the professor was behind the dream scheme the entire time, and it was his clever idea to put the girls to bed in a creative and interesting way that they never would have seen coming. I really find this heartfelt ending to be a good fit after everything the characters had gone through, and it brings everything full circle in the end. This episode doesn't even rely on a heavy moral. It's just a general all-around fun time from start to finish, and that's exactly what I'm looking for in a show like this. My only real complaint with this episode would have to be the characters' unnecessary off-model reactions because I find them very distracting more than humorous, and the girls are perfectly capable of expressing emotion through body language rather than poorly drawn faces, but other than that, it's a solid episode. I actively enjoy The Big Sleep as an episode and stand by the notion that it is, indeed, the best episode of the reboot from season 1. So, with that said, I'm left with just one more episode to talk about. Hoo boy. Anyone who's seen my review of this particular episode already knows that it's my #1 selection for the worst Powerpuff Girls reboot episode of all time. Nothing comes close to the sheer amount of misguidedness that plagues Once Upon a Townsville to possibly even consider it for the runner-up position.
You've got to be a superhero with mad flow. Now it's time for a Buttercup beatbox solo. Yeah.
I have thought tirelessly for hours while working on this video, even as I was editing previous segments of this list. I really tried to find a saving grace somewhere in here, but the delivery, the misconstrued moral, the execution, the main character, everything about this just sends nothing but negative connotations my way. This episode centers around a princess by the name of Bluebell, or Blue Balls as I jokingly called her in my review, who finds herself magically transported to Townsville in a similar fashion to the plot of the movie Enchanted. It's fairly obvious that this film is what the episode is parodying, but other than what can be seen on the surface, that's about all there is to it. The Powerpuff Girls end up running into this princess and introduce themselves to her, in which they mockingly parody a Disney song to deliver some exposition. It's nothing special though, she's just a generic princess waiting for her prince to come rescue her, which the girls aren't too keen on and suggest she try to spend her time doing something else that's useful. Maybe even something that betters herself as a person and contributes to society in a meaningful way. Bluebell, given her primitive mindset, rebukes the idea and continues on her merry way, leading her to a volcano where she attempts to jump in so that her prince can save her, regardless of the fact that there is no chance of a prince saving her, and instead Buttercup shows up in the nick of time to prevent her from sinking into a death trap of molten lava. I said it in the review and I'll say it again here. When the Powerpuff Girls suggest to Bluebell that she can be her own person who could either start a company or punch bad guys, just to name a few things, this episode could have gone in a very, very progressive direction. I fully support the notion that Bluebell should have the right to think for herself and not rely on this clearly unreliable prince figure. Yes, I understand that Bluebell is going to have some difficulty shifting into this new mindset considering she was born and raised into this fairy tale realm. It's the same struggle that Giselle faces in the movie, but at least in the latter, the princess character doesn't go around attempting to kill herself. It certainly doesn't help that Buttercup and her sisters attempt to sway her with this intolerable rap number.
Maybe we just need to explain it in a different way.
Oh, yes! You're a princess, that's clear enough.
But a princess is better when she's tough. Explosion!
The song is bad, the lyrics are dull, the animation isn't impressive, the beatboxing sucks, the random old people in the background has no semblance of a joke whatsoever, and everything else just falls apart completely, so needless to say this song is a complete waste of time. At least Bluebell got to leave halfway through it. Why couldn't we? Bluebell then proceeds to run up and down and all around town looking for ways to put herself at the risk of death so that her magical prince, who, again, has confirmed that he's not going to show up, can save her from her demise. If he didn't show up the first time, what makes her think he'll show up the second? The girls proceed to stop her from doing so because of their obligation as superheroes, and Bluebell just ends up getting more and more frustrated as a result, with the ultimate coup de grace occurring when the girls are abducted by the dragon, which also came through the portal at the beginning of the episode, instead of Bluebell. How the dragon managed to fit through this thing? I have no idea. This shift is supposed to serve well for Bluebell's character, as it signifies a change which is intended to make her a better, more independent person, but that positivity gets quickly revoked once she saves the girls from the dragon just moments later. Oh man, here we go again.
I can rely on myself from now on, and I don't need you.
Yay!
And that goes for you three, too.
What?
You guys didn't respect me for who I was in the first place.
So originally I pointed out 8 major issues with this episode's resolution and as a whole, which I elaborated on during my previous go at explaining why this ending is as horrendous as it is. However, it turns out that even more issues have revealed themselves, and I'm going to attempt to go through them as clearly and swiftly as I can, starting with the fact that Bluebell openly attacks the girls for being technically correct. The girls are preaching to her about being her own person for the entire duration of the episode. They give her positive reinforcement and encouragement in the idea that she shouldn't waste her life away depending on others, especially the ones who aren't going to do anything to help her. Instead of thanking the girls for leading her in the right direction, she accuses them of not respecting her as a person, which is all sorts of BS because that's not what happened at all.
You don't want to get eaten by this volcano?
But how else is my prince supposed to save me?
You don't need to be saved. You can do anything you want with your life. Yeah, like run your own company. Or punch bad guys.
Anything besides being all dainty for some prince that'll never show up.
That doesn't sound very disrespectful to me. They're being supportive. They're doing exactly what good citizens would do in a situation like this. They're taking on the moral high ground by playing the role of the idealized superhero and guiding her down the path of virtue. They even sang her a song, as painful as it was to listen to help get her out of her delusional mindset and look at the world from a clearer perspective. But no, apparently she'd rather chastise them for saving her life on numerous occasions. What makes this even worse is the fact that Bluebell straight up admits that the girls were, indeed, right all along, but gets mad at them anyways.
I learned that I don't need to rely on some prince to save me for my life to truly begin.
Like, geez, lady, they just saved your life several times. You wouldn't be standing there right now if it hadn't been for them. Show some basic human decency. How can you just stand there and accuse the girls of not giving you respect when you're the only one in the room right now who's being disrespectful? Talk about being a hypocrite. All they did was provide some helpful suggestions, and you claim you're the one being disrespected? Let's not forget the fact that the girls are constantly going out of their way, taking time out of their busy lives when they could be doing bigger and better things, to save this woman's life again and again after she continuously puts herself in harm's way, over and over and over. And for what? To get insulted for absolutely no justifiable reason at all that just makes them feel bad in the end? Bluebell ends up repeatedly attempting to kill herself in hopes that this so-called prince will be there to save her. But the fact that the prince never shows up until that very moment in the cave proves that he would not have been there to do anything. She would have died, and nobody would have known if it weren't for the girls coming to the rescue. Besides, how was the prince even supposed to know where she was? And for that matter, how did he wind up in the cave? How did he know she even fell down this well to begin with? I think the episode would have been better off if it had just removed the prince from the scene completely. Bluebell sees that he would not have been there to save her with her own eyes. She is fully aware of the true fact that the girls were doing her a favor, yet shuns them off anyways because she refuses to acknowledge the good they had done for her. And this princess is supposed to be the role model of the episode? Give me a break. The fact that the girls ultimately feel bad for saving her life, almost to the point where they seem like they regret doing so, is a major blunder on the episode's part. It is not unheard of for people to save someone's life and get attacked by the victim because they intentionally wanted to commit suicide. In fact, The Incredibles tackles this subject during its opening act. Very well, I might add, in which Mr. Incredible gets sued after rescuing a base jumper who attempted to kill himself after jumping off a building. Despite the fight. Okay, that is the best blunder you've ever had. Oh my gosh, I can't get over that. Despite the fact that he was outed by this man, who actually goes by the name of Oliver Sansweet, fun fact for you, Mr. Incredible still stands by his moral principles that he did the right thing by saving his life.
The plaintiff, Oliver Sansweet, who was foiled in his attempted suicide by Mr. Incredible, has filed suit against the famed superhero in Superior Court.
Mr. Sansweet didn't ask to be saved. Mr. Sansweet didn't want to be saved. And the injury received from Mr. Incredible's actions, so-called, causes him daily pain.
Hey, I saved your life!
You didn't save my life, you ruined my death. That's what the...
Listen,
my
client has no further comment at this time.
This is exactly what I'm talking about when I say the girls should not regret their actions. Even if Bluebell is going to be unreasonable in her response to their actions at the end of the day, they should not have been written to regret doing the right thing. At least Oliver here has a reason to be upset, because the incident supposedly resulted in him having to spend the rest of his life in daily pain. Bluebell, on the other hand, has absolutely no room to talk whatsoever. The episode is unintentionally spreading the message that you should never attempt to stop someone from committing suicide, especially when it's only being done to get another person's attention. The way suicide is treated as a quirk in this episode gets under my skin like you wouldn't believe. For an episode that's intended to be teaching girls about working together despite the differing interests they may have, it certainly doesn't seem to be showing us anything of the sort. The only reference to these female characters having differences amongst each other is when Bluebell tells the girls that she doesn't like punching bad guys and prefers to wear frilly dresses, which ultimately ends up leading Bubbles to question her interest in said things. Thanks to Bluebell's harsh words, Bubbles is left under the implication that she's not allowed to like both, which Blossom quickly reaffirms isn't true, and she can like both things if she wants to. This entire conflict is introduced and resolved within a matter of seconds, so pardon me if I question the credibility of such a moral, because the entire 11 minutes before this moment had nothing to do with that. Once Upon a Townsville lacks any sense of coherence. One moment the episode implies that you should be the chooser of your own destiny, then it switches to Bluebell attempting to kill herself, which leads into the points I brought up earlier, and only after that segment concludes does this idea of only liking certain things get brought into question. I'd like to leave off on this final remark. Is there something I'm not seeing here? Is this episode really that amazing and I'm just missing the obvious? I find it hard to believe that I'm completely in the wrong on this, because over 60,000 people have watched my review of the episode and not a single person has ever corrected me on this. I'm not saying I'm using that to confirm my interpretation of the episode to be the 100% correct way to interpret it or anything, but clearly I'm not alone here. It continues to baffle me to no end that this episode in particular acclaims praise when it does not deserve it. Once Upon a Townsville is undoubtedly the worst episode of any cartoon I have ever seen in my lifetime. I think that, on top of everything else I've said, speaks for itself. And that concludes my countdown of the top 5 best and top 5 worst episodes of Season 1 of the Powerpuff Girls 2016. Sorry for getting a little bit serious there during my last entry. I know that's usually not my style, and I do apologize for that, but I wanted to make my, hopefully, last discussion of that episode count. So now, where do we go from here? Season 1 is finally, after much stalling and teasing, completed. I've covered every episode, I've covered the internet shorts, and now I've done a final sum of the season with this best and worst episode list. So, next up, we have Season 2, and based on the episodes that I've seen so far, I can safely say that we're still in for one heck of a ride. To those wondering, yes, I shall be talking about the original in time. I want to completely get the reboot out of the way before moving on to the classic series, because I don't want to rush into it. Sure, I've been doing videos for nearly 2 years now at the time of this recording, but I don't want to get to the original series until I'm certain I can do it justice. Like I said, I've got plenty of other great things planned along the way, and hopefully you'll be willing to give them all a chance. Be sure to check out all of the people I shouted out during my introduction to this video, as I seriously cannot thank them enough, and I will see you guys later.